Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Friday, everybody's favorite day of the week, pretty much. Fun plans for the weekend?
I want to go to Cypress Mountain.
Want to go to Cypress Mountain? Just like to ski or snowboard, or just?
No, I just want to see the snow.
Just want to see some snow? Yeah, you'll see some up there. I think a friend of mine went last night. They went skiing, and there was lots of. Looked very snowy, so. Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah. Anyone else? Fun plans? No fun plans? Well, that's depressing. No. I don't think I have anything particular planned anyway, so I don't think that I don't have anything better going on. Let's say hello to Blake. Good morning, Blake. Mulder's here. Good morning, Mulder. Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. Sarah's here. Good morning, Sarah. Tufshin Sana is here. Good morning to you. And Abby is here. Good morning. And Simrat is here. Good morning. And Shania is here. Hello, Shania. So yesterday we were talking about, we were just kind of wrapping up the idea of privilege. And I think, it was easy enough to define privilege as, unearned benefits and advantages and opportunities that one social group gets in society, whereas another one does not, right? One social group is advantaged, one is disadvantaged. Yeah, and it's very easy to define that way, but it's hard to kind of think about how it works in practice, right, in real life. And some people, I think, really struggle with trying to sort of understand what privilege is, and in many cases they struggle to understand it because if you're in the dominant group, you don't really experience it, right? You don't perceive that you have special advantages. You just kind of feel like, well, yeah, this is what life is like, right? This is what people are like.
So I think privilege are so similar to systematic racism. Social studies learn about systematic racism, and I think these are so similar.
They are connected. How do they define systemic racism in sociology?
Privilege.
Exactly like that?
So I have examples of like what's the difference between, like, as I said, why a gay person can't be a president,
Yeah, exactly, right? Although Pete Buttigieg was just sworn in as, oh gosh, what is he? He's a cabinet minister now in the States, and he's head of infrastructure or something like that, and he is a gay man. So not the president, but he has a very high-ranking post in the US government. So that's good. But yeah, but that's true, right? Systemic racism is kind of the way that society is structured, and it keeps certain groups from being able to access the same rights or privileges or opportunities that the rest of us do, and privilege is connected to that as well. I guess privilege you could think of are the specific ways in which people have advantages or disadvantages, right? So systemic racism kind of describes how the entire system works, but privilege is kind of happens on a more individual level, and it specifies what kind of things you are allowed to do or not allowed to do, or what benefits you have or benefits you don't have, or whatever. So I think they're very closely related. But I'm and who's your teacher? Okay.
Sorry.
Lisa? No? Okay. You can ask her about this, but to me it almost seems like there's it's a difference in levels. So systemic racism is something that describes how a society works. Privilege is something that describes kind of individual benefits that people may or may not have, I think. She might define it differently, but that's kind of what I think. I'd be curious to know what she thinks, actually. We said that privilege had kind of three external dimensions, if you will. One was that the integration of dominant group norms into the structures of society. And so society is built in a way or designed in a way that benefits that benefits the dominant group. The minoritized group will have a more difficult time, right? And the example I used of this had to do with ability, right? You all came here again this morning, or some of you did anyway. You came here this morning, and there were all kinds of barriers to you getting here, but you probably didn't even think about them, right? You opened doors, you came upstairs, you stepped off curbs, maybe you crossed the street, against the light because you looked around and there were no cars, and so you went for it. You did all these things because of your ability, right? And the fact that our society is designed for people who can walk around with their feet and can use their hands and can see and hear. And so people that don't have those abilities have challenges, right? Getting to school in the morning is not quite so easy, right? It takes some extra planning, sometimes some technology, sometimes some help from other people, right? The construction of what's normal and not normal by the dominant group. So Linda was nice enough to give me a perfect example of that yesterday, right? So this month is Black History Month, right? Why do we have Black history and not white history or Caucasian history? Well, because white history is white history, right? So the default version of history is it's just history, but of course it's usually told from a Western point of view, from a European, from a white point of view. And so here in February, we're paying attention to aspects of Black history. And so not that there's anything wrong with that. We need to pay extra attention to those people and stories and lessons from history. But I'm just pointing out that, there is a such thing as Black history, but there's not a such thing as white history. And it's, and that's why, right? Again, you'll see lots of products for women or for her, because the products for men aren't for men because men are the default, right? They're the normal version of things. And finally, the invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. Often the dominant group does not see what privilege they have, and they don't really know when it's working for them either. And so again, I said that I do have a decent amount of privilege in this society, but it's hard for me to really know when it is working, right? When it is, because again, it just seems like the way things should be, right? People are nice to me, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail, but nobody ever, I'm not clearly handed an advantage and said, here, this is because you're a man, right? That doesn't happen. Good morning. That doesn't happen. So it's difficult to see sometimes. We said there are some internal aspects to privilege too, for the dominant group anyway, believing that their group has the right to their position, internalizing messages of their own group's superiority, a lack of humility that results from limited knowledge of the minoritized group. Again, I said the Americans are notorious for this. They know all about US and American history, but they don't really know anything about any other parts of the world. And so they have no idea what's going on up here in Canada. They think we're all riding polar bears or whatever. I don't know what they think, but they don't have a very good knowledge of other countries and other countries' affairs, but that doesn't seem to bother them because they think they're the best, right? Again, that's a bit stereotypical, but it's just an example. We were talking about internalized dominance and internalized oppression yesterday, and so this is kind of when people act out the social messages that they have received, right? Whether they're in the dominant group or the minoritized group. And I said a perfect example of this was Jane Elliott's class with the blue-eyed and the brown-eyed kids, and they acted out their internalized dominance. So the brown kids acted smarter and better behaved because that was the messaging they were receiving. And the blue-eyed kids kind of did the opposite. They acted out the social messages that they received, that they were not as smart and didn't do as well on assignments. And indeed, they did do that, right? So these social messages we absorb do have an impact on how we think and feel and behave. We said one aspect of internalized dominance was microaggressions, right? And so these microaggressions are micro meaning small or tiny, and aggressions meaning aggressions. These two things microaggressions were kind of little comments that sometimes have the potential to hurt other people or to upset other people, but oftentimes it's not really meant that way. But then it's really difficult to tell. And so I'll return to, to Nasser's example yesterday of, oh, you speak such good English, right? And the idea there is that, well, why shouldn't she, right? Why should she not? And again, it was probably meant as a compliment. The person probably wasn't meaning to upset Nasser in any way. But again, sometimes because these social messages are in operation, someone can say something with a certain intent, and then a person can receive that comment and perceive it in a different way, right? And so that's why these microaggressions are so tricky, because people often don't intend to upset people, and people on the other end don't intend to be upset, but sometimes it kind of happens anyway. And it's really just it's an artifact, or it's an effect of the social messaging that we have in society. And so to some degree, we have to let ourselves and others off the hook for these, because they're very easy to do, and they're often not intentional. But we also have to kind of educate ourselves as to what they are, so that we can kind of expose the underlying biases and social messages, right? So yeah, questions like this, what are you for a multiracial person? That's not appropriate. I bet you were beautiful when you were young. The underlying message is you're not beautiful now, right? That hurts. I don't see you as black, or I don't see you as the race that you belong to. Again, it kind of discounts that person's identity, or it implies that something is wrong with being black, right? I don't see you that way because that is bad, right? That's the underlying message. And there's really tons of these too. I put a few in the slides here just so you could read through them. We definitely don't need to go through them all. But you can see that these microaggressions all have an underlying message, right? So this happens to people in BC quite a bit, because BC and particularly in Vancouver, it's a very diverse, multicultural place, right? And so sometimes people will be asked, oh, where are you from? And the answer is, I'm from here. I'm Canadian. Even though the person might be sort of ethnically or genetically Japanese, for instance, you might ask a Japanese-looking person, oh, where are you from? And the answer might be, I'm Canadian, I'm from here, as are my parents and my grandparents. We were all born here. We're all Canadian, right? But again, the message is, you're not one of us, right? Canadian looks like this, right? Canadian looks white, you're not white, therefore where are you from, right? That's the underlying, good morning, that's the underlying message, right? And so, do any of these kind of jump out at you in any way that you might want to talk about or comment? Anything jumping out? If it doesn't, I've got more. See, even more. Yeah. Anything jumping out that you want to say something about right now? No? Okay. All of these are, again, kind of microaggressions, and they're things that people might say. Some of them have a grain of truth to them, like the idea here that I believe the most qualified person should get the job. Yeah, that's good, right? But it also fails to recognize that there are barriers in the way, right? And we saw that with the study on discrimination in hiring from the University of Chicago, right? Yes, the most qualified person should get the job, and if people want to succeed, they do have to work hard. Those two things are true, but it doesn't mean that that's the only variable in the equation, right? And for people in minoritized groups, there are extra variables, right? There are barriers to them succeeding, despite the fact that they may be working actually very hard, right? So again, some of these they're difficult to kind of pull apart because they have grains of truth to them. In some cases, they are meant as compliments, and often, it's just they are what they are. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. Okay. Oh, I've got even more. Wow. Second-class citizens, environmental microaggressions. How to offend without really trying. Oh yeah, how to offend without really trying. So all of these are, all of these things are kind of sayings or cliches or things that people say, but there's a bit of like racism or heterosexism mixed in, right? Oh, that's so gay, right? So what does that imply about gayness? Gay's bad, yeah, that's the message there, right? When something is so gay, it means that something is so bad or uncool or not good, right? That's what it implies. Do any of these other ones jump out at you? Does anyone say that?
So, I don't usually feel these microaggressions.
You don't feel them or fear them? Feel?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it normal for one to not feel any sort of microaggression?
Well, I mean, the thing is, it kind of depends. In part, it depends on the social groups you belong to and where you are. I don't feel a lot of microaggressions here in Canada because most people don't point them at me, right? So I don't feel them that way. It's also very possible that I'm just going to put myself back there. It's also very possible that people don't pick up on the underlying message. So you have to be kind of somewhat aware of social dynamics and social justice issues to start to pick some of these up. For some people, they just don't it just doesn't register and it goes over their head, right? Or they might be annoyed or upset at some of these, but they don't know why, right? They'll be like, why was I so agitated when that person said that? They were just trying to be nice, right? And so they might not sort of have pulled apart exactly why they are responding the way they are. So yeah, Scotty, I think that's, again, depending on the groups you belong to, depending on where you are, depending on, how you think or perceive the things that people say to you, yeah, you might feel them and you might not. But they do exist. Okay, so internalized oppression. This is kind of the blue-eyed kid thing, where people act out the social messaging that they've received about their group being not as good, right? So I've kind of just listed a bunch of them here that you can kind of read through. Again, I'm not necessarily in a lot of minoritized groups here in Canada, and so these aren't experiences that I really have firsthand, and so I can't really speak to them directly. But often often what happens with internalized oppression is people kind of figure out a way to work with the dominant group and kind of either assimilate to what the dominant group wants, or at least not challenge the dominant group in some way, okay? And so, do any of these things kind of jump out at you in any way? Or make you think of something? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking, Nasra? Tell me. I desperately want to know. What's that?
There was a time we called a taxi, me and my sister.
Here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he pulled up to like where we were, and he saw us, and he drove away.
Oh, interesting. That's not cool. That is not cool. Well, that's discrimination, right? That's discrimination right there. Yeah, this one's a little more tricky, and let me just see here. Yeah, I guess the theme here is basically the idea that people in minoritized groups either, try to sort of go along with what the dominant group wants because it's easier. They don't challenge the dominant group, and sometimes they try to assimilate themselves into the dominant group's kind of norms. I'm not sure about this actually, but should I? Good morning. Maybe I won't share that one. Okay, so there's lots here. We don't have to go through all of this. I put this in here for your reading pleasure later. But again, tendencies of people in privileged positions and tendencies of people in oppressed positions. And so doesn't mean that all people think or behave this way all the time, but it gives you an idea of how an oppression that exists within society, say sexism or racism, how it kind of plays out in terms of people's individual feelings and behavior. And again, it doesn't mean that all of those are in play all the time, but some of them might be.
You didn't talk about money privilege, or is that not the theme?
Money privilege, like classism. I have I'm going to try and build it out a little bit, but sometimes we run out of time. I have a little unit on that towards the end. And so we will talk about it a little bit. Did you want to say something about it right now? Or were you just wondering if it would come up? Okay, it will come up. Okay, so yes, let's just review privilege quickly and then we'll move on. So again, privilege is characteristically invisible to people who have it. And one of the ways to kind of think about this is, we're kind of, imagine we're all fish, okay, and we're swimming through a sea of social messaging, if you will. Do you think fish really feel the water around them? No, because it's always there, right? Do you feel the air around you all the time? No, because most of us have no idea what it's like to be in a room with no air, right? I don't know if it feels different. It won't feel different for long if it does, but we don't really know what it feels like to be in an environment that has no air, right? I assume it would be strange. And so just for the fish has no idea what it feels like to be in an environment that's not water, unless it gets caught, unfortunately. But for the most part, it doesn't realize it, right? And so you can almost think about privilege like the current of a river, right? So the river runs one way. And so if the fish swims with the current, it gets where it's going very quickly, right? But do you think it really feels the push of the water? Probably not, right? Same thing if you're walking with the wind at your back. Sometimes you don't, unless it's a strong wind, but you don't really feel it so much. But if you're walking into the wind is in your face, you feel it, right? If the fish is swimming against the current, the fish can get where it's going, but it's got to swim harder, right? It's got to work harder. And privilege is kind of like this in a way. So if the current is moving, if you're moving in the direction of the current, if you have privilege, then things are just a little bit easier, right? But the fact is you don't really notice they're easier because the current is just gently pushing you along, right? Where if you don't have privilege, it's the other way. You are swimming against the current and you definitely feel the fact that you have to work harder, or there's things that you have to do that other people don't, right? And so again, the current example is another, I guess, decent metaphor for privilege. But again, it's not, unlike the current of the river, privilege is not a natural thing, right? It is a socially constructed thing. There's Dory. Okay. Ableism, finally, first form of oppression that we'll deal with. I've got some things to show you. I've got a short documentary to show you. I've got someone to introduce to you on the screen named Adam Pearson, but we'll get to Adam in a minute. So, quick reminder, stereotypes are simplified or reduced characteristics of a group, right? And so I see someone, I get information about them through my eyes, and the stereotype tells me who they are or what I know about them, right? And so again, this can have to do with race or ethnicity or gender or sexuality or economic class or religious affiliation or language speaking or name, way you dress, anything, right? We have stereotypes about people that we kind of use to understand others. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative. Prejudice is a learned prejudgment, so an idea that you have towards a particular group of people, or maybe an easier example is the dog, right? Do you have positive or negative prejudice towards dogs, right? I have a positive one. But it's unfair because that means that I think of all dogs that way. And are all dogs good dogs? No, they're not, right? Some of them bite, some of them are not trained very well, some of them are very loud and yappy and annoying when they live next door to you. So not all dogs are good dogs, but I have a positive prejudice towards dogs. And then finally, discrimination is when we act on our prejudices, right? Yes, bring the dog over, I love the dog, or don't even think about bringing that scroungy animal into my house, right? Depends on my prejudice, I can positively or negatively discriminate against the dog. And oppression, we know, is these policies and practices and procedures and norms that advantage one group in society and disadvantage another, okay? We know all that, I'm just reviewing it quickly, okay? And privilege, I'm not going to review it because we just talked about it. Okay, here's where I want to start. So ableism. So ableism is one of these oppressive relationships in society that we've talked about. And in this case, we're talking about an oppressive relationship. I got to fix this slide. It's not exactly what I want to say. We need to, it's an oppressive relationship by people who are able and people who have some kind of disability, right? And often based on those disabilities, we assign certain character traits to people. We imagine them to be certain ways, okay? And we often think of disabled people as defined by their disability, right? And so we see through our stereotypes, and we often see the disability first, not the person first, okay? And so ableism kind of affects people with disabilities in these ways, and actually in all kinds of different ways, because people who fit into this group, unlike some other social groups that we'll talk about, people in the disabled social group are very, very different, right? So people who are not straight, for instance, so they're not heterosexual, there's a few different types of experiences, but lots of them are gay, right? And lots of them are lesbians. And then there's some people who are pansexual or bisexual or asexual or demisexual. But most of them are kind of very similar. But as you can see here, people with disabilities come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, if you will, right? Some people, do I go through these? Yeah, so some people have vision impairments, right? Some people can't see very well, or they have partial vision. Some people have hearing impairments, so they might not hear very well, or they might be deaf. They might not hear anything at all. Some people in the disabled group might have mental health conditions, and so that can go anywhere from, sort of anxiety and depression and ADHD, all the way to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and all kinds of things. So people with mental health issues, significant ones, can fall into the category of disability. For those of you who might be thinking, oh, I have anxiety, or oh, I've had depression before, I think usually to be part of this social group, it would have to like really be, it would really have to affect the living of your life, right? Like you were having trouble living your life because your depression or anxiety was so severe. So most of us deal with a little bit of depression or anxiety from time to time, but at work, I think here we're kind of thinking about people who, it's a disruption to their lives. Like they are having trouble just going to work and buying groceries and just having a normal life. So mental illness, mental health conditions can put people in this sort of disability group. Intellectual disabilities. So people who have developmental disabilities or, they may have, they may have an intellectual impairment, right? They might not, their brains might not function in a way that allows them to kind of be self-sufficient and live their own lives, right? People with acquired brain injuries can fall into disability too. So, they might have been normal, quote unquote, before, but with a brain injury, they might find it very difficult to kind of live their lives in an independent, normal, quote unquote, state, right? People on the autism spectrum. And so autism is something that is not yet fully understood, but people with autism sometimes have problems with communicating with other people. So either their verbal or their nonverbal communication, they struggle to either express themselves or they struggle to understand what other people are communicating to them. And there's a few other kind of characteristics of people with autism as well, but depending on the sort of severity of those symptoms, they can be in the disability group. People with physical disabilities, right? So people who use a wheelchair or kind of other technology because they don't walk or whatever, physical disabilities, right? So as you can imagine, all of those different experiences are probably, or all those people are having very different experiences, right? To be someone who is visually impaired or someone is blind in society is much different from being in a wheelchair, which is also much different from being on the autism spectrum, right? All of those things are different experiences. And so again, this is a very diverse group of people that we're kind of lumping into one category and saying, disabled, right? But again, all of them are going to experience discrimination in some, not all of them, but many of them are going to experience discrimination in some form or another because, again, we hold stereotypes about people with disabilities, and often we don't understand them. We see their disability first, and we don't see who they are, right? And so in societies that are ableist, people with disabilities are seen as less valuable, sometimes even less human. The extreme example, of course, would be Nazi Germany, where Hitler and the Nazis attempted to exterminate people with disabilities because they were felt to be inferior, not strong enough. He didn't want them contributing to the gene pool of the pure German race, quote unquote. And so the Nazis tried to exterminate these people because they were less valuable and even less human. So this brings us to our first examination of an oppression, and we're going to talk about a few things in this watching this documentary. There's a lot of questions here, and I think it would be a good idea for me. It would be a good idea for me just to post these in Microsoft Teams. So I'm just going to do that right now. So this is a little documentary. In it, you'll see that it is narrated by a man named Adam Pearson. And so we'll meet Adam Pearson. Oops. Hang on. I'm trying to do two things at once, and I just screwed everything up. Oops. Good. Okay. Right, so I have put the questions in Microsoft Teams. So we'll meet Adam Pearson, and I'll ask you to pay attention to some things that happen. And so the social groups to which Adam Pearson belongs, and is he in minoritized or dominant groups? In what ways has he experienced discrimination? And are those experiences maybe microaggressions? In what ways does Adam and other disabled persons deal with prejudicial statements or discrimination or microaggressions? How do they respond to people who are directing these things at them? A little bit later, we'll see someone convicted of assaulting a disabled person will spend less time in prison than someone convicted of assaulting a person belonging to a racial or religious minority. And why is that? And then a few other questions, but maybe we'll pick up those a little bit later, okay? So for online people, actually I'm going to do one more thing. For online people, you'll be able to watch this documentary on YouTube, and so I'm just going to put the YouTube link into my message here, which I neglected to do before. Okay. There. So the questions are on Microsoft Teams, but the YouTube link is as well. And so for online people, maybe what I'll ask you to do is we will watch, let's watch 15 minutes of this, and then let's watch 20 minutes of it, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and see talk about what we've seen, okay? So 20 minutes and then a 10-minute break, that's 30 minutes. So on the clock here, I'm going to put just 32 minutes, just to there. And so online people, the link and the questions are in Microsoft Teams, so I'll set you loose to watch 20 minutes of the video, take a break, and then we'll come back, okay? So we'll see you in just a little bit. Okay, people, we are now officially back. So we've met Adam Pearson. Who is this guy?
What is it? Disability? Normal?
Yeah, Adam has a disability. What is his disability?
His face is different.
Yeah, he has a facial disfigurement, right? So he has a condition, he says, where non-cancerous tumors grow on his nerve endings in his face, and so that's caused his face to become kind of, differently shaped. So what kind of social groups does he belong to?
People with eye problems.
Yeah, so he belongs to the disability social group, right? He has here we go. He has a disability. What other social groups does he belong to, though? He belongs to others. What are some other social groups? Gender? What's that? Yeah, he's a man, right? So he's a male. He belongs to the male social group. What other social groups does he belong to?
White.
What's that?
White.
Yeah, he's a white guy, right? Lives in England, lives in Britain or the UK, right? So he's a white guy. What other social groups? Other social groups. So we've got race or ethnicity. We've got gender, sexuality. What do you think? Yeah, we could probably assume he's straight. We have no real information to say either way, and spoiler alert, in the rest of the documentary we don't find out either. But of course, most people are straight, like if you look at the statistics. So, if you had to bet his sexuality, he's probably straight, but we don't really know for sure. Economic class, what do you think? Rich guy? Yeah, probably like roughly middle class, I would say. We were at his mom's house. Does his mom look like she has tons of money? Not so much, right? And I think he actually lives in that house too. I think he lives with his mom in that house as well. So, yeah, kind of very average middle class person. Religion? Probably, right? Again, we have no indication that he's religious in any particular way, but Britain is a Christian country, and so, if he's not a practicing Christian, he probably has kind of a Christian background. Again, we don't know for sure. We're just making a guess, and that's okay. We know his nationality, right? We assume, I think he's born in the UK, so he's a citizen, right? He's a UK citizen. Okay, so in which of these groups are dominant ones, or in which of them are minoritized ones? Which of those social groups that he belongs to, which of them are dominant and which of them are minoritized? So he's disabled.
White.
Yep. So disabled is minoritized. White, dominant. Male, dominant. UK citizen, dominant. English speaker, I'm going to throw that in there. Dominant. Christian-ish, dominant. Straight, dominant. Right. So interestingly, Adam Pearson is a member of a lot of dominant groups, right? He's actually got a fair amount of privilege in society, but his life is pretty significantly defined by that one group membership, right? That one disability, especially because it is so visible to everyone else, right? If you think about someone with a mental illness, depending on what that mental illness is, it might not really be visible to a lot of people, right? You can walk down the street and, if you have a mental illness, people might not know unless you're acting really strangely, but people might not know. But with Adam, it's pretty hard to hide, right? It's a very It's very obvious that something is different about him just by looking at him. And so because of that, he's experienced some discrimination. So what kind of discrimination and what kind of treatment does he receive based on his disability? How do people interact with him? What's that?
Weird.
Okay, but in what way weird?
Like they ask, how did you get that disability? What happened?
Okay, so some people will directly ask him, hey, what happened to your, what's wrong with your face, right? What happened to your face, right? What else do people say or do around him?
In the bus, they don't sit next to him.
Right, no, nobody sat next to him on the bus, not even anywhere near him, right? Everybody gave him a wide berth, right? And, don't get me wrong, I don't really want anyone sitting next to me on the bus anyway. I like my space, but he gets a lot of space, right? And again, it's simply because he looks different, right? And especially because, is he kind of a snappy dresser? Well, he's put together, right? I'm not saying, cutting edge fashion for a 19-year-old, but I'm saying, he's wearing nice clothes. We saw him, I think, putting on cologne before, so he probably smells nice, combs his hair. Yeah, he takes care of his appearance. It's not like he smells or anything, but yeah, people don't want to sit anywhere near him. What else do people do towards him and the other guy in the bar?
They beat him up.
I don't know if he's been beaten up, but certainly some people with disabilities have been physically attacked. Did he say that he was beaten up?
He said he was like pinned against the wall.
Oh, okay, maybe in school or something like that. Yeah, okay, sure.
The comments he got on YouTube.
Right, the YouTube comment, right, where someone said that, haha, what happened to that guy with the face should have, or what happened to the alien has anyone seen that movie, Under the Skin? Scarlett Johansson? I haven't seen it. I don't know really what it's about. Well, I guess it's about an alien. So spoiler alert, the alien at the end gets set on fire and somebody says, haha, that should have happened to this Adam Pearson guy when he was born, haha, right? And yeah, that's what I was trying to point out, is that that's clearly hate speech, right? You're inciting violence against someone based on their race, gender, sexuality, religion, disability, whatever, right? You're calling for violence because this guy looks this way, right? That's hate speech, and it's very clearly spelled out in YouTube's policies, right? But of course, YouTube said, oh, we don't see anything wrong. Look again, YouTube. I'm actually on YouTube right now. Look again, YouTube. Something is wrong. If you're going to write a policy, read it from time to time. So, sorry, I just thought I would use that opportunity to do that. What else happens to Adam? And what about Dan? Like he's at the bar or he's at the nightclub with Dan, the guy who's in the wheelchair. I think he's a veteran from, did they say Afghanistan? Yeah, he's from Afghanistan. So what happens to those two there?
So rude. She was like, are you stuck to it? That's so rude. Do a wheelie? What? So rude.
Yeah, that woman comes up and, yeah, is incredibly rude toward Dan. Are you stuck in your wheelchair? No, I just, I'm too lazy to get up. Like, of course not, right? Of course the person is using the chair because they need the chair. Like,
Please get up and try.
yeah, gross, right? And again, the do a wheelie thing, this is the kind of public property thing that Adam mentioned, right? Because I have a disability, I become public property. Do you know what that kind of means? Everybody just approaches you and regular social rules don't apply, right? Like if you were at the SkyTrain station, waiting for the train, and some random person walks up to you and says, hey, do a cartwheel. Yeah, like no, right? You don't just tell people to do things, right? Do you just tell people to do things, random people on the street? No, it's rude, right? Do you say to people, oh, I see you all the time, I know you, I love you, come here, give me a hug? Just random people that you've never met before? No, that's not socially acceptable.
It's cool.
What's that?
It's cool.
No, it's not cool.
Why do they do that?
Why do they do that?
Yeah.
Because it's internalized dominance. They're acting out their position of power. They feel that Adam or Dan are somehow less than them, and so they don't have to follow the same rules. They don't have to follow the same rules of social norms because these people are somehow less than them.
No, but it doesn't make sense. As a normal person, I wouldn't do that.
No,
They're not normal. A normal person, it's not normal for you to just go to a disabled
it's
person.
true. Well, and that's those, what we saw at the bar was certainly an extreme example, right? Extreme example. Also, alcohol could have been a factor, right? People tend to behave badly when they've been drinking, so that could have been part of it. But
Maybe the society they are, guys they keep up with that.
yeah, I think that there are social messages that support this, but again, sometimes the alcohol brings out bad behavior. Maybe those people were just jerks because some people are jerks. We know that. The other thing to sort of connect to that is when they were speaking to Adam's mom, and Adam says, I know people are going to look, right? I know people are going to look at Adam because he looks pretty different, right? And if you saw him on the street, you might take a second look, right? Because he's very distinctive, right? But she says, I don't mind people looking because I know people are going to have a second look because he looks different. But it's when they start, hey, psst, look, you gotta see this guy, look at this. That's where she gets upset, right? Because again, this is a cultural norm or a social norm here in the West, and so I don't know if if you all have the same thing, but we're taught, you don't stare at people, particularly if something is different about them, right? So if somebody is doing something different, or like you're not supposed to stare. You're not supposed to look at people and make them feel uncomfortable. And so, yeah, they're kind of violating this social norm, but apparently it's okay because Adam looks different. So you're allowed to stare at him. He's yeah, we don't have to follow the same social rules with Adam because somehow he is less, right? And so again, you're right. Those people were jerks, and most of us would not behave that way. But the fact is that some people do, and they did on camera, although they didn't know they were being filmed. But they did so on camera, right? We saw it happen.
That guy who hugged him,
Yeah.
like he was like what, trying to comfort him? Was he like, oh, give me a hug? Like why?
Yeah. Do you like to be hugged by random people you don't even know?
Yes.
Really? Okay. Well, to each their own, as they say. But I don't. I don't like people touching me and trying to hug me when I've never met them before. I don't like that, right? And I would go so far as to say that most people do not, right? And I don't think Adam does either. And so, besides, the British aren't really a touchy-feely culture anyway. His mom probably hugs him once a year on his birthday. No, I'm just teasing. Now I'm dealing in stereotypes, but that's a stereotype. But still, yeah, they treat him. They don't have to treat him the same way, right? They don't have to give him the same level of respect, or they don't have to follow social norms because he's less than, right? Would you say some of those are microaggressions, or are they just full on?
Yeah, I think they're very direct.
Yeah, we saw a lot of full-on stuff, and we heard about some of those things from Lucas as well, right? The younger guy with the blonde hair. Yeah, we heard he had some pretty negative experiences in school as well along the same lines.
What is elephant face? What does that mean? Where did it come from?
Elephant Man?
Yeah, elephant face.
There's a very sort of famous man named John Merrick, and I think he was around in the late 1800s, and he had a condition which I think in sort of shorthand is called elephantitis, but it has a more fancy name. And what happens is that I think you have tumors growing, but they grow in your bones, okay? And because the tumor is growing inside the bones, it causes the bones to be misshapen as well. So if you Google a picture of John Merrick or the Elephant Man, you'll see this guy with a very, very misshapen head and body as well. And I think what it was, don't quote me on this, but I think he had a condition where these tumors were growing in his skeletal system inside his bones, and so it caused the bones to sort of become very deformed and strange looking, and he looked very strange as a result. But of course, John Merrick received a lot of discrimination and hurtful comments because people weren't very woke in the late 1800s. You see him? Yeah. So, yeah, but again, you know, Lucas says, you know, why are people calling him, why are 6-year-old kids calling him the Elephant Man? 6-year-old kids don't know who the Elephant Man is. And even, you know, 19-year-old kids don't know who the Elephant Man is, right? So how does Adam and does Dan, the Afghan war vet, how do they deal with this sort of behavior? Look, especially Dan, because Dan dealt with that woman who was speaking to him. What was his approach in dealing with her? Did he tell her to, you know what? No. What did he? How did he respond?
Kind of polite.
He was very polite and patient with her. Yeah. What else did he do? He was polite.
He was open-minded. He didn't care whatever the society commented.
I don't know if I would say he didn't care, but if it upset him, he didn't show that.
Yeah, I think he's used to it. Also, I think he finds humor in it.
I think he uses humor. And he kind of did, right? Because he said, you know, she said, oh, well, why don't you get your legs? And he said, well, you know, it's difficult to walk when you're drunk. Well, imagine being drunk and trying to walk in legs that are not fully under your control. Like, imagine that. And so, yeah, he made a few jokes with her. But again, how do you think he really felt? Yeah, he was probably upset. He was probably annoyed. He's probably like, oh, this again, right? I'm sure it's not the first time somebody has said stuff like this to him. And why do you think he didn't just respond to this woman in a direct way and say, you know what you're saying is really offensive and rude, so please leave? Why do you think he didn't do that? Could have. Right. So there's, yeah, because this is kind of an internalized dominance and internalized oppression situation, right? So this woman somehow feels that she is more or better or greater than him. So she feels very comfortable treating him in a very rude way, right? A patronizing way is what Adam says. And Dan also feels this dynamic, and so he is extra polite, right? And he tries to laugh it off, he tries to make a joke, because what's going to happen? Like, what do you think her response would have been if Dan had said, you know what, you're being really rude, I don't like what you're saying, you know, you don't speak this way to people, you know, hit the road, right? Well, what do you think her response would have been? Oh gosh, I'm terribly sorry for offending you? She wouldn't take it well. What would she probably say? What's that? Well, how do you mean? Okay. So it might upset her. She might become angry and then start, you know, saying even worse things. That's possible. What else might happen?
Obviously, we'd hope it doesn't get physical.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it doesn't get physical. She might become upset herself, though, and say even more hurtful things. What else? Relax. I'm just kidding. Don't you have a sense of humor? Just a joke. Just relax, right? So, and that's the other thing, too, and that's often what people use to back themselves out of when they've said things that are offensive and rude. They're like, oh, can't you take a joke? Just relax. I'm just kidding. You're so serious, right? And so his concerns, his feelings would not have been validated, right? She would have dismissed them, or she would have become angry, and it would have made it look like he was the jerk, right? He was the one who was oversensitive. He was the one who, you know, just can't go out and have a good time at the bar. He's got to get all, that's rude and you shouldn't do, right? So it's gonna make him seem like the bad guy, when in fact he is not, right? He's the victim in this exchange, right? Yeah, and often you'll see that. People who experience discriminatory or prejudicial remarks will often do that. They'll often let it go, they'll be very polite, they'll laugh it off or make a joke in some way. But again, that's not really how they feel. And I don't think, you know, Dan has clearly dealt with behavior like that before. It's not the first time. He laughs it off and is very polite, but, you know, he's upset. That's it. Have a good weekend. Bye.